This is Godzilla in 2014. And this is Godzilla now. Why does one of these feel like a force of nature, and the other feels like a guy in a suit? Same franchise, same creature, 10 years apart. Something changed, and it wasn't the budget. The first Godzilla came out in 2014, and it was genuinely unlike anything audiences had seen before. It was successful enough to spawn 3 sequels, and those sequels kept getting bigger. More monsters, more fights, more spectacle. But somewhere along the way, the thing that made the first one special quietly disappeared, and I think I know exactly where it went. When you're making a movie about something enormous, perspective is everything. It's the lens through which the audience experiences the world. And when you get it right, it lets the audience's imagination do the heavy lifting. Because the less you see of something, the bigger it feels. This franchise started from the ground looking up, but it ended up inside the monster's head. That shift is what this video is about. Keep that in mind as we go through each film. We're not just tracking quality, we're tracking a very specific creative decision that compounds across 4 movies until there's nothing left of it.
We call him Godzilla.
One of the first things this movie does right is show us what it actually means for something the size of Godzilla to exist in the same world as us. Before Godzilla even fully appears, the film anchors us to a little girl on the beach with her family. There's an alert, a tsunami is incoming, chaos, crowds running. And as we watch that panic from her perspective, we already know the tsunami was caused by Godzilla displacing water just by emerging offshore. He hasn't even done anything yet, he's just there and people are already dying for it. That's the philosophy of this entire film. These titans aren't hunting us. They're not targeting anyone. People are just in the way. The consequence of something this large moving through human space is a disaster by default. And the movie never lets you forget that by constantly returning us to the human perspective to show us what disaster actually looks like on the ground. We see it with the people on the train when the Muto appears. We're grounded through the protagonist's eyes next to a lost child. And suddenly, the stakes are completely human, even as something incomprehensible tears the train apart. We see it with the kids on the school bus on the bridge. We see it with the firefighters who open a penthouse door and find that the walls is just gone. These aren't action sequences. These are disaster sequences, and that distinction matters. The other thing this film does brilliantly is withhold. It treats Godzilla the same way a great horror movie treats its monsters. We get glimpses, silhouettes, partial reveals. The whole first act is suggestion. And there's this one moment during the tsunami sequence that I love, where the camera follows the flood up the side of a building, the power cuts out, and flares get shot into the sky. And for just a second, in that light, you see the scale difference between Godzilla and the humans beneath him. It's the first time the film actually shows you what you're dealing with, and it uses it perfectly. The humans immediately start shooting at him, which tells you everything about how powerless they actually are. The full reveal comes later, and it's earned. The camera follows a line of explosions at the ground level, lands on a foot stump, and everything goes quiet. And then slowly pans up to his face. That silence before the roar is doing so much work. The movie has made you wait long enough that the reveal feels like a release. And even after that reveal, the film still doesn't show you the full fight until the very end. It trusts the audience to stay patient, and that trust is the whole game. That brings us to the physics. I talked about this in my Pacific Rim video. Large things don't move slowly just because they're large. It's inertia. The bigger you are, the more energy it takes to accelerate, and the more energy it takes to stop. Every movement has a wind-up and a follow-through. You can actually see it in the moment Godzilla whips his tail at the flying Muto. Watch how long the anticipation takes. It winds up slowly, builds, and then the speed and impact feel completely justified because the film showed you what it cost. The lighting works the same way. Almost every major kaiju sequence in this film happens at night, and that's not just for the vibes. Darkness hides the ceiling on scale. The less visual information you have, the more your imagination fills in. And your imagination will always build something bigger than the frame can show you. This movie did everything right, but when it came out, audiences had one complaint. There wasn't enough Godzilla in the Godzilla movie. They wanted more, and the studio listened. That decision is where the story really starts.
Local legends call it Rodan, the fire demon.
King of Monsters opens with something genuinely great, the Rodan sequence. The setup follows the same logic as the Hawaii beach scene from the first film. There's a ticking clock, civilians are evacuating, a family is trying to survive, and we're watching all of it from the ground. When Rodan finally bursts through the mountain, the moment lands exactly the way it should. Everything stops, the scale is overwhelming, and what follows is pure disaster. Entire city blocks obliterated just from the air displacement of his flight. Still shot from the human perspective, still working. But then watch how he moves. For something of Rodan's mass, the movements are too fluid. He turns too quickly, accelerates too fast. There's no resistance in the air, no sense that each direction change is costing him anything. Compare him to the flying Muto from the first film. Notice the wide banking radius, the way it feels like the air is pushing back. The Muto moves like something big moving through a medium it has to work against. Rodan moves like a fighter jet, and fighter jets are a fraction of his size. That's the thing about scale. Big things don't just look big, they move big. In 2014, every movement has weight. There's a delay, a build-up, a follow-through. Rodan skips all of that. The scene still works because it's mostly grounded in the human perspective. But this is the first place where spectacle quietly started winning over believability. The bigger crack, though, shows up in how this film handles its monsters as characters. In the first movie, the Mutos didn't have a personality you could relate to. They were following a biological imperative. They wanted to reproduce, and humans happened to be in the space they needed. There was no malice, no intent, which meant you never needed to see the world from their perspective. You only ever saw the world reacting to them. Ghidorah is different. He has intent, he's predatory, malicious. And to communicate that, the film has to let you inside his perspective. Show you what he's looking at, what he's going after. The moment you do that, the monster stops being a force of nature and starts being a character, and characters feel human-sized. Look at the final fight in this film and ask yourself, where are we watching this from? We're essentially at eye level with two beings in conflict. It's shot like a confrontation between two characters, not like a disaster unfolding from below. Early in the film, when Godzilla and Ghidorah clashes near the humans, there's still some grounding. The human characters are caught in the crossfire, their aircraft getting damaged, and we feel the fight through their danger. But here, the moment the humans leave the scene, the film switches entirely to the Titan's perspective. The fight starts being shot like two people fighting instead of a catastrophe happening. That's the tell, and it only gets more pronounced from here. What kept this film from fully losing the thread, and this is worth saying, is that the writers still gave the audience human characters worth following, characters you could latch onto and experience the world through. That anchor is what kept the perspective grounded as much as possible. It's something the next two films will let go of almost entirely. This film announces its perspective in the very first shot. We open with Kong going through his morning routine from his point of view, not a human's perspective. He's living his life, and this franchise is fully committed to treating these creatures as protagonists. And you feel that commitment immediately in the first major fight, Godzilla and Kong in the ocean. On paper, this sequence has a real challenge. Two of the largest creatures in the franchise placed in the middle of open waters where there's almost nothing to sell scale. The film does its best. Ships, fighter jets, human personnel scattered around for reference. And the VFX work is genuinely impressive. Water behaves differently around something this large. It doesn't just splash, it displaces. You can see that here. The waves Kong and Godzilla generate feel real. The fur on Kong has weight. It moves with the slow secondary motion of something dense, not the quick flutter of human hair. That's all done really well. But VFX alone can't fix the perspective problem, because even with all those scale references in the frame, the camera treats Kong and Godzilla like two boxers. Medium shots, reaction cuts, eye level with the fighters. We're not watching a disaster from below anymore. We're watching a match from ringside, and your brain knows the difference immediately, even if you can't name it. This is the trap I mentioned earlier, and it's worth naming it directly here, because this is the film where it becomes unavoidable. The audience wanted more screen time with the Titans. More screen time means treating them as characters. Characters need their own perspective. That perspective humanizes them, and humanizing them makes them feel small. It's not a failure of filmmaking. It's a structural consequence of giving the audience exactly what they asked for. The Hong Kong fight is genuinely fun. I want to be clear about that. The filmmakers knew exactly what they were doing. They pull back to the ground level where they can. They try to keep some human witness in the frame, and the spectacle delivers. But even here, when you put it next to the equivalent moment from 2014, the difference in weight is clear. Kong swings between skyscrapers like the buildings aren't even there. The city destruction has no consequence. Buildings are just props, and the camera is mostly over the shoulder inside the fight, not below it looking up. You're allowed to be big and dumb and fun. What you can't be is boring. This film isn't boring, but it cashed in every bit of goodwill the first film earned, and the next film would have nothing left to spend. It's worth talking about the human side of these movies for a second, because it connects directly to everything I've been saying. In the first film, the humans weren't the most compelling characters ever written, but they were competent enough. You had a small family caught in the path of something they couldn't control, and the film used them as your anchor throughout. Most of the destruction you see is filtered through their experience. That's the whole point. There are eyes on the ground, but the moment spectacle becomes the priority, the human story stops getting the same attention. And that creates a real problem, because you can't make a whole movie with just Titans fighting for budgetary reasons, which means you're essentially asking your audience to sit through sections that they don't care about, just to get to the parts that they do. That trade-off worked well enough in Godzilla vs. Kong, because the spectacle delivered. But by Godzilla x Kong, the human storyline has gone so thin that the gap between those sections and the Titan sequences felt like two different movies, and not in a good way. Everything the franchise has been drifting towards arrives here all at once. Look how the Titans are framed in the opening sequences. They're centering the shots, clean compositions, lots of empty space around them. The early fight between Godzilla and the crab creature is shot from a pulled back aerial angle that makes them look like toys on the table. Before a single punch is thrown, the camera's relationship to these creatures is telling you they're small, and then Hollow Earth makes everything worse. When Kong is introduced in that underground environment, the scale problems becomes total. Titans that once couldn't fit the frame are now consumed by the empty space around them. When the baby ape shows up, even though he's clearly smaller than Kong, you can't actually tell by how much, because there's nothing reliable in the environment to triangulate against. Then this happens. Think about what that means physically. That's the equivalent of using a 20-story building as a ragdoll. The concept of weight is just gone. The roar is a small thing, but it's a perfect symptom of how inflation works across a franchise. In 2014, a roar was an event. It was rare. It was overwhelming. It demanded the scene to stop. But by this film, every beat ends with one. It's punctuation now, not exclamation. The more you use something, the less it means. And then there's the sprint shot. I don't even need to explain what's wrong with it. You already felt it when you saw it. But here's why it feels wrong. A creature the size of Godzilla running at full speed should look like nothing you've ever seen before. The ground impact alone should be seismic. The acceleration should feel like watching something overcome enormous inertia. Instead, it looks like a familiar run, a human run, scaled up. Because by this point, the film has spent so long treating Godzilla as a character that his body language reads as human and human-sized. The final fight is the logical destination of every decision this franchise has made after 2014. The Titans move like humans. They fight like humans. They're framed like humans. Buildings fall around them like set dressing. There's no ground perspective, no human cost, no sense that any of this matters to anyone except the creatures doing it. It's impressive on a technical level, but it's emotionally weightless. That's the full distance this franchise traveled. From a film where a creature emerging from the ocean caused a tsunami that killed people that never even saw it coming, to a film where two giants wrestle in a neon city and it feels like a video game cutscene. Here's the thing though, nobody made a villain decision here. The audience asked for more Godzilla. The studio delivered more Godzilla. And more Godzilla, by the internal logic of how movies work, meant humanizing him, giving him screen time, treating him like a character with a perspective. Every step of that chain makes complete sense, and every step of that chain made him smaller. So why does that 2014 film still feel like nothing else? Because you're watching it from the ground, as a human, surrounded by other humans who are just as lost and powerless as you are, watching something that doesn't know you exist. Scale is a feeling, not a size, and you only feel it from below.